Hola, amigos. ¿Dónde está mi sombrero? Un momento. Bebé, ¿dónde está mi sombrero? Aquí es mi sombrero. Welcome back, everybody. We are back. Nehemiah, chapter 6 today. And this chapter is basically going to talk about how to continue God's work while everybody else around you is actively trying to distract you, actively trying to mess things up, actively trying to ruin your life. And if you remember from the previous videos, Nehemiah was rebuilding Jerusalem's wall. The people were locked in. The progress was being made. The progress was happening. And wherever progress shows up, haters, they sort of clock in early and they show up to kind of try to distract you and pull you away from what God has called you to do. So without further ado, let's jump into Nehemiah chapter 6. All right, you remember that fella named Sanballat? Yeah. Remember that fella named Tobiah? Yeah. Well, Sanballat, Tobiah, and a fellow named Geshem the Arab start showing up. Haters gonna hate, am I right? Verse 1 says this: Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. Verse 2, so Sanballat and Geshem, they send a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. Oh no. Now listen, anytime your enemies say, hey, we want to talk, what they really mean is, we'd like to derail your project quietly. But Nehemiah, he immediately recognizes this. At the end of verse 2, he says, but I realized they were plotting to harm me. So he tells them, I'm doing some really good work here. I can't come down to talk to you. I cannot come down to meet you. Let's rewind. Let's screenshot that. Put a sticky note on that. Nehemiah, he doesn't argue with these people. He doesn't try to explain to these people. He doesn't try to negotiate with these people. He just says, I'm busy working and I can't leave. They ask him 4 different times, and every single time Nehemiah answers the exact same way. He says, I'm busy. I can't leave what I'm doing to come talk to you. How about consistency is spiritual warfare? How many times will the enemy keep attacking you with the exact same thing, and you keep saying, no, 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 no? Yeah. So since the private distraction doesn't work, Sanballat, he then decides to take things public. He sends an open letter, which is basically the ancient day version of Twitter, and he accuses Nehemiah of planning a rebellion, trying to make himself king, hiring prophets to hype him up. Basically, he's saying, breaking news, everyone! Nehemiah is unhinged, and we need to stop it. Let's protest! But Nehemiah's response is calm, cool, collected, lethal. Verse 8, he says, there is no truth in any part of your story. You are making up the whole thing. You made that up. That's straight from your imagination. So instead of spiraling, Nehemiah says this: they were just trying to intimidate us, imagining that they could discourage us from stopping the work. Discourage us and stop the work. So I continued the work with even greater determination. Nehemiah didn't write an essay. He didn't have a meltdown. He just said, God, keep me focused on what I'm doing. Keep me determined and motivated with what you have called me to do. Now, things kind of get a little bit sneaky here. In verse 10, it says, later I went to visit Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, and grandson of Mehetabel, who was confined to his home. He said, let us meet together inside the temple and bolt the doors shut. Your enemies are coming to kill you tonight. He says, let's hide in the temple, let's lock the doors, and let's panic immediately. Now, this may have sounded like holy advice. It may have even sounded very urgent, but it's rooted in fear. And so Nehemiah responds in verse 11 by saying, should someone in my position run from the danger? Should someone in my position enter the temple to save his life? No, I won't do it. So the translation for that is basically Nehemiah saying, if I run and hide, everybody else is going to think that God has failed, and I won't allow it. God had not sent this fellow Shemaiah. Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. So not every voice in our lives that seems religious or sounds religious is a righteous one, and not every warning comes from God. If it leads to fear, if it leads to compromise, if it leads to disobedience, it's probably counterfeit. No, it is counterfeit. And then starting in verse 15, despite all the threats, the lies, the gossip, the false prophets, the Bible finally says this. So on October 2nd, the wall was finished just 52 days after we had begun. 52 days, that's not bad at all. In verse 16, it says, when our enemies in the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized this work had been done with the help of our God. So the enemies couldn't stop it. The enemies couldn't sabotage it. All they could do was watch God finish it. Won't he do it? And despite the wall being built, despite the enemies being humiliated, at the end of chapter 6, in verse 19, it says, "They kept telling me about Tobiah's good deeds, and then they told him everything I said, and Tobiah kept sending threatening letters to try or to intimidate me." So even after the wall is finished, Tobiah keeps sending these letters to try to put fear into Nehemiah, to try to put fear into the people, and I think this tells us something important. Completion does not silence the critics, but it does expose them. And that is the end of chapter 6. What are the takeaways that we can learn from this today? I think that not every invitation is an opportunity from God. Nehemiah understood that this distraction from Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, I think his name was, that it wasn't from God. Oftentimes, distraction is dressed up as dialogue, and if saying yes to something pulls you away from what God has clearly told you to do, it's not wisdom, it's a trap. Sometimes, simply saying no is the most spiritual thing that you can do. Second thing is, you don't need to defend yourself to everybody. Nehemiah, he denied this lie once that the people were spreading about him, Tobiah and Sanballat and Geshem. He trusted that the truth plus time plus God equaled vindication. Constantly defending yourself, it keeps you busy. And the saying goes, if the enemy can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. And when you're busy, you're often unproductive. So, but third thing, fear-based advice is never God-based advice. Even though this fear came wrapped in religious terminology, religious language from this Shemaiah fella, Nehemiah refused it. God doesn't lead through panic. He leads through obedience and he leads through peace. If advice from someone is requiring compromise, if it's requiring you hiding, if it's requiring sin, then there's a good chance it didn't come from heaven. Next thing is that God's work will finish even if the noise doesn't stop. In this particular chapter, the wall was finished, the wall was completed, but the gossip never stopped. God never promised silence, he promised completion. So focus on finishing, not fixing everyone's opinion. So, with all of that said, if you're building something God told you to build and people keep trying to pull you down into a city called Oh No, remember, you're doing good work. Keep it up. Won't he do it?